Movies and video games are a lot of fun, aren't they? They give you something to do with your friends and family. They make you laugh. They make you cry. But how? How can such emotions be conveyed with something completely fake? Well, have you ever paid attention to what you were hearing during these times? Wrong direction again. The secret to this passion is the music. A movie or video game is heavily influenced by the soundtrack associated with it. They may come in varied styles and sounds, but they can share many common themes that you can learn to identify. Unlike most music these days, a video game or movie soundtrack must be able to tell a story. This is the thing that's going to tell you about the journey that is to come, so they must have a lot of thought put into them. Now, the 5 things that I think that a soundtrack is good for is theory, orchestration, mood, uniquity, and content. Now, there may be more things you specifically value in music, but these are mostly unanimous aspects of songwriting that I would like to speak about today. First, I would like to talk about theory. Musical theory is essentially why something sounds the way it does. This can include things like chords, tempo, or harmony. The game I'm going to use as an example is Dark Souls. More specifically, the song Ornstein and Smough. At this point in Dark Souls, you have fought way too hard to turn back. This game is extremely difficult, but beating it is definitely worth the effort, as the boss Ornstein and Smough is one you will never forget. This song is amazing, but the theory is where it really shines, so allow me to explain it in pointless and excruciating detail. Now, if you're not a music geek like myself, this part may get a little complicated, so bear with me. And thanks to Beckett, the piano man, for helping me demonstrate. Everybody quick give him a golf clap. Alright, I'm going to be analyzing the chord section of this song. This section starts on a C minor chord and then walks up the scale with a perfect 4th and a perfect 5th. It then goes to E minor, the 3rd note of the C minor scale, and walks up in the same manner. It skips up to A minor and then ends on D minor. Alright, this song might seem a little simple, but that's actually what makes it so brilliant. The section ends on a D minor chord. D minor is the 2nd chord of the C minor scale, so it wonderfully leads into the next riff with a kind of nervous and ambiguous sound. When you add a little bit of flair to it, this song is definitely worth any boss's difficulty. Super epic, isn't it? And that's all thanks to theory. The next point I would like to bring up is orchestration. Orchestration is essentially the mechanical components of music. This can include things like instrumentation, audio, or conduction. The game I'm going to use as an example is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. This is one of the best video games I've ever experienced. It was the first to make me physically cry at the end. Now, some of you are internally laughing at me because that is a pretty weird thing to say. But if you have not cried because of a video game yet, you need to get on that. Now, the soundtrack that pairs with this game is also super good, but the orchestration is where it really shines. At this point in the game, you've already fought a giant fire centipede, a giant mushroom with tentacle things, and a giant ghost that throws lanterns at you. Now you have to fight this gigantic flying sandworm with a mouth that opens sideways and spawns little, I don't know, it's terrifying. But the theme for this fight is a classic Zelda song, and for good reason. The theory is outstanding, but I would like to talk about the orchestration. Now, as far as instrumentation goes, this song is played with bongos, flutes, a cappella, and more, and it kind of gives off a desert feel to the fight. The amazing thing about this song's orchestration is that this song is used twice, but with different orchestration. Near the end, the game drops several colorless versions of the past bosses that you have to fight again. Mulgara is the last one, and it is a super epic fight. And the music is just as good. It's the same song, but it has different instrumentation. This time it has an electric organ-y feel that makes it mysterious and exciting, and it leads perfectly into the finale. As you can see, this is why this game is so good. The next thing I would like to talk about is mood. Now this can apply to nearly every piece of music, not just in video games or movies. However, the example I would like to use is a little underrated in the musical community, the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Now, redo that sentence. It was the summer of 2018. I was a naive and sweaty teenage nerd with a mind set on learning something new. I was going on a plane ride to Idaho, and I decided to gain something other than excessive amounts of sleep and sodium. So I was looking through my bookshelf for something to read on the plane ride. I found the Lord of the Rings series, looked into my soul, and asked myself, am I really going to read 400 pages of this thing? I read the prologue, then I was hooked. I read the first book, but before I finished the second, I decided to watch the first movie. I was prepared for it to be a disappointment compared to the book, but it was actually an excellent film with amazing music to pair with it. The mood is where this movie really shines. The mood of the book is an adventure with battle and action. However, the movie has a different tone to it. It feels creepy and unsettling. You can feel the torment as Bilbo looks at the ring, his face growing distorted with fear and desire. And the music pairs perfectly with this type of emotion. As you can hear, the theory and orchestration is just fine. However, the mood is where it really is special. Speaking of special, next is uniquity. Uniquity is what makes a song one. It's what sets it apart from other music at the time. For this, another history lesson need be told. However, first, I'm going to give an example, as uniquity is somewhat underrated in the musical community as well. I was talking to a friend earlier this year. He's actually in the audience. Hello. I was talking to a friend earlier this year, and he was playing me the soundtrack from Divinity 2. He loved that music, and I bet he'd play it all the time if he had the choice. However, my musical taste disagreed. I have the feeling that Divinity 2 is a little too similar to other soundtracks like Skyrim or The Witcher, and it kind of ruined the magic for me. So I believe, as underrated as it may be, that uniquity is one of the most special parts of any soundtrack. For this, I'm going to be using the Charlie Brown series. And no, I'm not talking about the Peanuts movie. I'm talking about the older ones, the ones from the 80s. Now for this, another history lesson need be told. It was the late 1950s, and the album Birth of the Cool by Miles Davis was released. It was a jazz album that blew away all of the competition with its cool melodies and funky sound. It was different than the usual jazz chart, which is what made it so good. Now, you may be wondering, well, what does that have to do with Charlie Brown? Well, simple. The Charlie Brown series was heavily inspired by this album. If you can hear it in the soundtrack, you can definitely tell that it has a casual, laid-back feel, and it makes it really unique. Now, this is what made this soundtrack so special. It was a quirky little adventure in every movie, and the weirdest thing is that it felt completely human. It didn't feel fake, which is why uniquity is so important. This soft feel was way different than other jazz at the time, which is what set this movie apart from everything else. And finally, the most important aspect of any soundtrack, how it fits the content. The game I will be using as an example is one of the best experiences I've ever had in my lifetime, Earthbound. Earthbound is a happy and upbeat game from the 90s, or at least that's what most people think at first glance. It's actually a super dark and depressing game about suffering, manipulation, and cultural instability. It's super dark, and the soundtrack pairs with it almost perfectly. The song I'm going to use is the final boss theme, Pokey Means Business. Great title, isn't it? Now, this song starts with a fast and complex 8-bit riff that's really common in most games like this, kind of cliche. However, it suddenly changes to a literal metal sound, like electric guitars, distortion, rock drums, everything. It's metal. And that's what kind of set it apart. However, although it had good theory, orchestration, mood, and uniquity, how it fit the content was mind-blowing to me. It perfectly represents the cliche-looking exterior of the game and then the deep and dark interior. Uh-oh. There we go. There, you now understand what core elements make a soundtrack good. Now you might be wondering, well, that sure is great to know, Mr. Boring Musics Man, but why do I need to know anything you just explained for the past 10 minutes? Well, allow me to explain. Movies and video games may be viewed as mere entertainment for most, but for some, it's actually a significant part of our culture, and it can define who we are as people. Being able to appreciate these smaller things will show you have a deep understanding of the content. It will make it more immersive, enjoyable, and memorable. Thank you.